Hi guys! So, today we're going to be talking about Victorian era marriage ads, also known as matrimonial advertisements. Do you like online dating? Well, these ads were the Victorians' version of online dating. And today we're going to be diving into how it worked, who placed these ads, and we're going to be reading some very interesting examples, both from Great Britain and America. I normally cover a lot of English stuff on here, but the American ads just have such a unique flavor to them that I felt I needed to share some of those too. Do you like classic literature and history? Well, if so, guess what? That's what this channel is about. Yay! My name is Ellie Dashwood and this is my channel. And if you do like classic literature and history, then definitely subscribe. So first up, what was a matrimonial advertisement? So matrimonial advertisements were short paragraphs people would run in a newspaper stating who they were and what they were looking for in a particular partner. I mean, this was the Victorian era's version of a personal ad in a newspaper. But what was interesting is in the Victorian era, this developed into a whole subset of newspapers. There were newspapers that ran absolutely nothing except for matrimonial ads, and they had names like Matrimonial Post and Fashionable Marriage, Matrimonial News and Special Advertiser, Matrimonial Mascot, Cupid, and Honeymoon. So these newspapers were dedicated to the people from the mid to late 1800s trying to find a mate. And they were really rising up to fulfill a societal need that was developing at the time, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But these newspapers, they'd run personal ads and they'd also run random ads to make money. But basically, they were all about trying to set up matches. And some of the matrimonial agencies that printed these newspapers also offered other services. Some people they would give special interviews to and try to matchmake them specifically with the people who were running ads in their newspaper, or they also offered a safe meeting ground because at this time it was incredibly dangerous for women to just go meet random people. So in their offices they'd have a space that was safe for someone who wanted to meet someone they had been corresponding with through the newspaper, but in a safe, neutral location. And so of course, people could subscribe to these newspapers or they could pick them up at their local newsstand. And each paper had about 200 advertisements in it. And a lot of those were reprints though. So it might take you more than one edition to find that true love of yours. So you might run your ad in the newspaper several weeks in a row. So some of those 200 would be reprints and some would be new people in the newspaper. And these newspapers and agencies really love to tout their success, which I think is funny because it's the same thing that modern online dating websites do today. For example, Match.com says that every year hundreds of thousands of people find love on Match.com. And these newspapers would do the same thing. They talk about all the happy couples they helped set up. Not only that, but they would also then charge the happy couples. In fact, within 1 month of a marriage that happened because of their newspaper, they expected you to pay them a fee, which was over £10. Now, what were the type of people advertising in these newspapers? Well, the demographic was actually incredibly broad. It ranged from everything from rich heiresses to servant girls, from English peers to shop workers, and of course the different newspapers catered to these different demographics. Now, why would all these people be advertising in these newspapers? Well, one of the reasons they got so popular in the second half of the 1800s was the fact that society was shifting. Traditionally, people looked for mates within their social network. They had broad social networks both in their family and in also their region and area, their neighbors, people their families have interacted with for generations. But with upward mobility of the middle class and people flooding into cities from the countryside, those networks were being broken down. And so you had quite a few lonely people in the city. They have no network to meet anybody in. And also social conventions around meeting people were incredibly strict. I think most people are familiar with the scene in Pride and Prejudice 2005 when Kitty and Lydia want to meet the officers and they're like, we're going to drop our handkerchiefs and then we're introduced. And that was actually a thing girls did back then. They dropped their handkerchief, they dropped their glove, their umbrella, so the cute guy over there will come pick it up and then they can start talking. Even though that was looked down upon and condemned, because technically, according to the etiquette of the day, the young man is supposed to pick up the object, hand it to her, and then leave without talking to her beyond perhaps a basic pleasantry. And so that was a huge problem. You had these people who had no way to meet anybody because their network has broken down and because the social barriers between men and women were extremely rigid at the time. Another reason was because the middle class was starting to think in terms of money more like the aristocracy had always thought, which was that for a family to support itself, it needed dual incomes. Now, a lot of people think of dual incomes as a modern concept of a wife bringing money into the relationship too. However, of course, if you've seen my video on dowries with why are the Bennett sisters so poor, then you'll know that back in the day, women also brought money into the marriage this way. And so the middle class started adopting this idea of planning their future marriage and what they would need financially based on how much they had and also how much they needed their new partner to have. And so not only was it hard to meet people then, but even if you dropped your handkerchief and the guy picks it up, how much money does he really have? Or conversely, if you pick up a girl's handkerchief, what if she has nothing? So these matrimonial ads also provided them a way to very specifically state their financial resources and also the financial resources they wanted their prospective mate to have. And a third reason that I think is incredibly important to remember about the Victorian era is that they loved love to the point that they stopped loving love. The idea of romantic love was so heavily pushed during this era that it became almost over-idolized in a way, and when marriage didn't live up to those concepts of being this romantic dream, people ended up very dissatisfied and disillusioned with the concept of romance. So there was quite a few people out there too that was like, my friend married for love and now she's miserable, so I need to do the logical things, state what I want in a prospective partner in my ad very clearly, and just do it like it's a business transaction. Now, how did society in general view these newspapers? They viewed them as scandalous, but also amusing. First off, on one hand, they had the concern that is still incredibly valid today with all the catfishing that goes on, which is, how do you know the people are telling the truth in these ads and they're not just trying to swindle you? And then, of course, on the other hand, they also had women need to be protected and need to not be talking to random strange guys. And that idea was so ingrained in their culture that it's dangerous for women to interact with men outside of their rigid social structure, that it was seen as quite a scandalous thing for a woman to place ads in one of these newspapers. Yet, given all of that, the fact that they think half of them are fraud, the other half are women that are going to get kidnapped or something, in between all of it, it's also just great fun to read. Even people who weren't looking for a mate loved to read these just because they were entertaining. And hopefully you'll see that when we go over some examples in a bit. And of course, they served up some inspiration for writers and dramatists of the era, because it's always great to throw in somebody placing a matrimonial ad in the middle of a play to spice up the story. Okay. So it's now time to imagine that we are back in the Victorian era and you want to find a mate through matrimonial ads. What do? Well, first off, you need to choose a newspaper and then place an ad. So first off, you can find these newspapers again at your local newsstand. So you pick one up and you see that the price for placing an ad is 1 shilling in the UK and 50 cents if you live in America, which is actually a very reasonable price. And if you can't afford that, you could also send them some stamps. They accepted payment in stamps. You would mail your advertisement and the fee or some stamps to the editor of the newspaper and they would run it. When it appeared in the newspaper, your ad would preferably not have your name on it because, again, remember, this is kind of scandalous. Instead, it would have a number. You could be number 942 or whatever. That was the number that came to mind for some reason. And so if somebody wanted to write to you and they were reading the newspaper, it would have 942 and then your advertisement, and then it would say address with editor. So what they would do is they'd be like, oh, 942 sounds like a great person. I'm going to write to them. So they're, dear 942. Well, actually, they're probably like, dear lady or dear gentleman or whatever, but we're going with 942 here. Dear 942, you sound great. We should get to know each other. And then they mail that to the editor, and then the editor will forward that on to you. So there's that safety built in where all the letters, initially at least, have to go through the editor, so your address isn't floating out there and your name isn't floating out there. Also, something else you could do is have your picture with the editor. So in your ad, you could say picture with editor, which meant that if somebody wanted to see this picture, they could write to the editor and be like, can I see the picture of number 942? And then they'd be like, yes, here it is. And they'll be like, wow, I should definitely write them. But of course, before you can even mail off this advertisement to be included, you have to write it. What should you include? Well, the first things you should include, of course, are your basic demographics, which during this time period would have been your gender, age, and marital status. So you could describe yourself as a middle-aged widow, or a young lady, or elderly gentleman, whatever you want to describe yourself as. And then, of course, you need to include your financial status and also the financial status of the person you're looking for. So you could say, I'm a middle-aged widow with a small fortune looking for a gentleman of land. Or you could say, I'm a young lady with 100 pounds capital looking for a man who's able to match that. Why is my street suddenly beeping? What's happening? Who knows? I found this very interesting in comparing the British ads to the American ads, is in both of them, the men felt the need to publish their financial or occupational background, such as I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a country gentleman. But while the British women also usually published their financial backing, American women, on the other hand, did not, which I just think is an interesting difference in how both of the societies at the time functioned. Other things you'd want to include is a physical description of yourself. So you could say, I'm tall with green eyes, or whatever you would like to say about yourself. Also mention if you have any children, of course, your interest in hobbies, possibly, like if you love music or drawing. Or as one gentleman published, he had lost all his money at gambling, which I don't know how that's going to get him a wife, but at least he was being honest, I guess. And then, of course, you would want to lay out any other requirements you'd have for your prospective mate, such as what they look like, what their background was, what their manners are like. And, of course, you'd want to label your intention. I think it's interesting because while it seemed more British ads had the intention of matrimony, quite a few American ads were labeled for amusement, meaning that they weren't interested in getting married. They just wanted to correspond with somebody for amusement. Now it is time for us to do the fun part of this video, which is actually read some of these ads because I think they're really amusing. My sister and I were reading them together and we were quite amused. So first up, if you're looking for a gentleman to marry, here are some prospective mates for you in the Victorian marriage market. So first up, we have number 1, right? Starting with 1, there's a great idea. This guy is a gentleman of title, aged 51, moderate income and quiet tastes. Healthy, active, cheerful, considered pleasing in look and manner. Seeks a wife of ample private fortune, a single lady, under 35, healthy, good-tempered, well-educated, and fond of country life. So if you would like to correspond with gentleman number 1, please let me know down in the comments. Unfortunately, he can't write back to you because he's probably been dead for a very, very long time. Now it's time for gentleman number 2. He is a bachelor, age 36, height 5 foot 9 inches, moderately stout, capital over 4,000 pounds, town councillor, public man locally, excellent character, agreeable disposition, abstainer, preferring quiet life, bearing very old historic name and taking great interest in local history, could enjoy being a country gentleman attending to local business, desirous of acquiring an estate with old castle associated with name for 7 centuries, provided means permitted, but can be satisfied without. Photo and particulars with editor. So, this is gentleman number 2, who apparently knows of a castle that's been connected with his name for generations, and he wants to buy it if he can find a wife rich enough to enable him to buy it, but he's willing to settle for a poorer woman that won't let him get his castle if required. So if you think you could help this man get his castle, please comment down below. Now it's time for bachelor number 3. I feel like I'm running a dating game at this point, but this is bachelor number 3. A gentleman, age 76, not being on the best terms with his relatives, is anxious to enter into matrimony with a lady who, by tranquilizing his declining days, will establish a claim on a large property. Advertiser is willing to settle £10,000 a year on his wife at marriage. So, this guy, he's 76 years old, he doesn't have anyone he really wants to leave his property to, so if you marry him, he could be your secret to riches. And for bachelor number 4, a clergyman of the Church of England, widower with 2 boys, aged 3 and 8 years, wishes to correspond with an affectionate Christian lady about his own age, from 26 to 32 years. The lady must be accustomed to good society. Of course, when he says that she needs to be accustomed to good society, that means she needs to come from probably at least the upper middle to upper class and have the manners to match. So of course, if a servant girl were to respond, that's not what he's interested in. So if you are interested in becoming the step parent of 2 boys, 3 and 8 years old, and the wife of this clergyman, let me know in the comments below. And finally, bachelor number 5. This guy is a young barrister of independent means, wishes to marry and settle down, would like to hear from a young lady of good family not over 25. If you've watched my video on how to be a gentleman or lady in Jane Austen's time, then you know that being a barrister was a genteel profession, and also the fact that he adds that he has private means is another indicator that he does come from a genteel background. And that is also what he's seeking in the woman by asking that she is of a good family. Okay, now it's time for some bachelorettes. So, first up is this young lady. It says, young widow lady, very well connected and highly educated, refined, cheerful, and companionable, desires a private introduction to a gentleman of good social position and means, speaks German, French, and Italian fluently, and is an accomplished pianist and vocalist of artistic taste and fond of intellectual pursuits. Please state full particulars. So this girl is touting that she has it all. Again, if you remember the video, How to Be a Gentleman or Lady, I talk about this also in the governess video, also in Regency era girls' education. Basically, I've talked about this topic a lot actually, about what it meant to be a refined, accomplished lady during this time period, and this woman is saying, I've got it all. Now you better tell me everything about yourself when you respond. Now, next up is very interesting bachelorette number 2. Here she says that she's a very pretty girl, age 19, wishes to marry to avoid being under the control of her friends. She has a dowry of £20,000 invested for her benefit. So this girl is like, I want to get married so I don't have to deal with these people. Now this is very interesting because she's 19. I believe the common age that an heiress would have control over her own money was 21. And it could be a situation where perhaps she's an orphan and her money and herself have been left to some trustees who are not that reliable, and she's looking to get out from under their control through marriage. And of course, the best way for her to get out from under their control is either to turn 21 or to get married. Of course, then she'd be coming under her husband's control, but then there's marriage settlements. Women in finances in this era, I'm going to make a whole other separate video on that. So if you're interested in learning more about that, definitely subscribe. Now, up for bachelorette number 3, which is Millie, an heiress of superior birth, education, and address, tall, handsome, and accomplished, of elegant form and manners, musical, of amiable disposition, and endowed with a virtuous heart, seeks a reciprocal return of the same, money secondary to intelligence. So here she's saying, I'll tell you about my money once you respond, but also I'm awesome. Thank you. Also, I think this one's really interesting because she included her name, which was not that common, I believe, in the British matrimonial ads. So those are our British bachelors and bachelorettes. Now it's time for some Americans, just because I think some of them are just hilarious. I feel like the tone is different, and so you guys are gonna see here. So first up, some brilliant American bachelors that you might want to talk to. So American bachelor number 1 is this guy. Wanted immediately. A wife by a gentleman of 22 who owns a large cotton plantation in Mississippi. 30 days after marriage, I shall come into possession of $40,000. Photographs exchanged. I have so many questions about this ad because doesn't it sound like he'll only get the $40,000 if he gets married and that's why he needs a wife immediately? And I'm just like, is this one of those like Hallmark movies, you know, the ones where it's like, we have an inheritance, but you can only have it if you get married to a stranger in 2 days. And it's just always like, who came up with this plot line? Well, apparently this guy's living the plot line in Mississippi in the late Victorian era. Or how about American Bachelor number 2? A Florida gentleman wishes to correspond with a young lady between the ages of 18 and 30. Object, matrimony. My age is 30. Black hair, brown eyes, height 5'7". Occupation, merchant. This guy cuts directly to the chase, lists out the particulars. He's not messing around. And then there's American Bachelor number 3, which, who could resist this guy? A young man, age 24, offers himself as a husband to any lady willing to invest from $4,000 to $10,000. Is kind and affectionate. Letters containing photographs answered immediately. Invest $4,000 to $10,000 in what? And any lady, it's like, hey, I'm a lady, I have $4,000. You're just gonna marry me? Then why do you even need my photograph? So many questions. And then finally, this American Bachelor. I would like to correspond with a few young ladies. Object, fun, and perhaps matrimony. I'm good looking and have plenty of money. John W. Trask. Wow, this guy is not unwilling to put his name to the fact that he's good looking and has plenty of money and only might marry somebody. He's so confident here. Okay, now it's time for the American Bachelorettes. Well, up first is this girl, Bachelorette number 1. She says, "Hear you, young men. If you want a wife just 18 years of age, a brunette with rosy cheeks, no paint or powder, answer this. Can give and shall require the best references." That's right, this girl has rosy cheeks and she does not paint them. All you young men better watch out there. Then there's Bachelorette number 2, who's just very creative. She says, "A pair of laughing blue eyes would like to take a peep into a letter from someone who wants an affectionate and lively young widow for a wife. My age is 28, honest. My hair is brown, my weight just 114 pounds. So, anybody who wants to write to Laughing Blue Eyes, let me know in the comments down below. Meanwhile, Bachelorette number 3 from America seems much more sensible. She says, "If you want a cultivated, sensible Christian lady for a wife, one who could and would do a true woman's part towards making an attractive, happy home, this is the very lady you're looking for. Age 22. Prefer correspondence from 30 to 40 years old. She's sensible, she's willing to do her part in the home, and she wants a guy who's at least 10 to 20 years older than her." The number 4 American Bachelorette is for all you true men out there. She says, "Brown hair and eyes, age 17, height 5'3", plump and hearty, can love a true man if he hasn't a dollar. Cora." That's right, if you have no dollars, she will love you if you're a true man. So, Cora, you could write to her if she wasn't dead. Also, if she wasn't 17. I think it's so sad that she's placing matrimonial ads at 17, but okay. And then finally, I have to round out these American matrimonial ads with Leona from Orlando, Florida. And that's right, she has her name and location published on her ad. And it's short, straight to the point. She says, all stunning, handsome, and fun-loving fellows. Address Leona A., Silveretta, Orlando, Florida. That's right. Leona is open to all stunning and handsome men writing her letters. So if you lived during this time period, do you think you would place a matrimonial ad trying to find the love of your life, or at least somebody whose income could combine with yours to make a good middle-class home? I think it's very interesting because some people did claim that people who found their mates this way actually were happier because they went into it clear-sighted and reasonable versus having these overly romantic imaginations of what it should be and then being disappointed after marriage. I still am not sold on the idea of finding a husband through placing ads, though I would totally read them if I lived back in the day just for the amusement of it all. And have an awesome day. Bye!